Ireland or the world has changed so much in the last 10 years. The the internet, when it was only kind of beginning then, or was being embraced for the first time by many businesses back then, to a point now where it's central to doing business, for example. The way we do business, technologies like CRM are central to how we understand our customers and how we react to their needs. In terms of Irish businesses themselves, particularly SMEs, how do you feel they've grasped e-commerce, and how, to what degree, and if they haven't, what work needs to be done to get them to reach international standards?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. And by the way, e-commerce, I think, is one of those words. It means different people, different things to different people. And I think you can break down e-commerce into various different parts. So if I was to take an aspect of e-commerce, such as, say, selling over the web, let's just define that as one aspect of e-commerce, which it is. We did a recent survey, and we were actually very surprised, because only about 23% of Irish companies are selling over the web. I was quite horrified. I don't know why, but I assumed there was more. And when we asked the question, within the next 12 months, would you plan to be selling online? 70% of them said no. And that was quite amazing, given that, by selling online, you can reach the world with your products. So to answer your question, what needs to be done, I think something needs to be done in that space. There needs to be some catalyst to drive up the number of companies that are selling online. I think there's a number of aspects to it. I think education is one. It's not just a matter of creating a website and putting some products on it. I mean, there's the whole digital marketing space. And I'd hazard a guess that many Irish companies would not be familiar and have the wherewithal to deal with search engine optimization, constantly staying on top of their website and their web shop to make a good e-commerce experience for the customers. So there's probably education there, I imagine. I also think getting a merchant agreement, because if you set up a web shop online and you want to trade online, yes, you can use PayPal and you can trade straight away, but if you get your own merchant agreement, you can use, say, Sage Pay, which is one of these payment services. And a Sage Pay option, it would be less expensive than PayPal. And clearly that's the case, because PayPal are taking the risk if you don't have a merchant agreement. So getting a merchant agreement from a bank is quite an onerous task. And I think if that was easier for small business to get a merchant agreement set up with their bank, if it was quicker, if it was slicker, it was less onerous, I think they'd be more willing to set up a web shop and trade online. So that's one aspect of e-commerce, I think, that would improve things for us, Irish businesses.
This is the thing. I mean, we've got examples of Irish businesses that have done it quite well. Like, I mean, if you think about Paddy Power, a traditional bookmaker that's completely reimagined itself through the online world, and now the internet accounts for most of its revenues, and it's a completely different type of company. I mean, that's a journey many Irish companies could take. In terms of ensuring Ireland has reached these international standards and being capable of competing with other nations. I mean, education is one thing, but there are examples already of UK retailers who are stealing business from Irish-based businesses that could easily provide the same business to customers down the road. What more do you think? Education is one thing, but is it something that the businesses themselves, I mean, ultimately they're the ones who really have to think about the product ideas and do the work. I mean, but apart from education, what other things could be done, and who could play a role in it?
I think, well, certainly education is one. The banks are another in terms of merchant agreements. Now, when you move outside of that, and you mentioned international connections, I think one of the things that happens with e-commerce, because there's a number of aspects of e-commerce, as I say, one of them is, say, e-procurement, which is another aspect. I think if the government, for instance, were to have a policy and say that, okay, anybody dealing with the government, we're having an e-procurement and an e-invoicing process, and that would force people then to get on that journey of e-commerce. I mean, it's another aspect of e-commerce, as I mentioned. For instance, as you know, in the UK, they've said that by 2018, cheques will be abolished. So, you know, if there's no checks, you know, that's another aspect of e-commerce that comes into play. So everything's going to have to be by credit cards or debit cards, or by bank transfers. So all of a sudden, by introducing some deadlines to abolish checks, some deadlines to implement 100% e-procurement or e-invoicing, all those things will help and in many ways force Irish businesses to get online, to get e-enabled, so they can actually change the shape of their business, so they can kind of have an e-commerce platform and work in an e-commerce way. I mean, it's not just, by the way, about trading online, etc. I mean, the cost of a company, you know, to raise an invoice is estimated to be somewhere between 25 and 30 euro. You know, so, you know, if I'm printing an invoice and I'm putting it in an envelope and I'm putting a stamp on it and I'm putting it in the post box and it arrives at the other end, it has to be entered into a system at the other end, then payment has to be made on the back of it, then a check has to be written and a check goes out, and yeah, that whole process is estimated. Now imagine a company and they're raising 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 invoices. That's a lot of money. So it's a lot of efficiency can be gained by embracing e-invoicing and e-procurement. And that's not to mention the green agenda. I mean, the green agenda is big and it's important. And again, that we can contribute to the green agenda by getting e-commerce and getting e-enabled.
So that's the thing, it's like a vicious circle. I mean, the entire economy relies on everybody paying and being paid on time, and if companies are, you know, saying checks in the post, or it's taking a long time for an e-invoice or a physical invoice to reach a supplier or a creditor, basically it creates a whole myriad of difficulties throughout the entire process.
It does. I mean, well, you've heard of the old saying, the check is in the post, you know. So it actually, in one way, it suits some people. It suits some businesses because they can use that excuse, the check is in the post. But it clogs up the whole monetary cycle. If you knew that you were going to be paid within 30 days on the button, and that would help you manage your cash flow better. And if you could manage your cash flow better, you could invest more. If you could invest more, you could grow your business. So I do think it clogs up the whole system, you know. Another aspect, by the way, of e-commerce is foreign exchange. And that's one of the areas we've also got involved in, John, is Sage Foreign Exchange. So we're not just accounting or payroll or CRM. We actually partnered with a company called TransferMate, and we've marketed Sage Foreign Exchange to our customer base. And some very interesting statistics. I mean, 56% of our customers that have our accounting software do foreign exchange. And that was another interesting fact that we got from our research. So that means 56% of those companies are transacting in dollars or pounds or whatever. And they need that foreign exchange facility. In the old days, they would go to the bank and they'd go up to the counter and they'd queue up and they'd get a bank draft in dollars and they'd pay for it and it would go, and it would take days to get there and all that stuff. Now they just log on to Sage Foreign Exchange. They're given a rate. If they like that rate, and there's no transaction charges, so if they like that rate, they say, yeah, I'll have that. They press a button. There's something like 10 seconds to agree the rate. They press the button and it's gone. Transaction complete. And that's integrated, or at least it will be integrated very shortly, with our Sage 50 accounts and our Sage 200 accounts. So the whole transaction can be seamless. And I think that helps a lot. I mean, that's helping to smooth and oil the wheels of transaction processing.
So that's the thing. I mean, one thing we realised as a country, we can't get rich selling houses to each other any longer. That the era's past. Our future lies as being exporters, and even not exporting while managing the flow around the world of things. How involved are you in things like the SEPA, the SEPA process?
Well, that's interesting because SEPA is one of the standards that's been looked at. But the problem is there's a lot of different standards out there. BASDA have a standard, the French have a standard. And one of the things that we're very interested in, and actually we're going to be more proactive in, is just getting involved in some of the bodies and the boards that agree this stuff, John, because there are far too many standards out there. And if we're going to have, say, e-invoicing anywhere from Kinsale to Toronto, to somewhere in France, then we have to have standards that allow that e-invoicing to take place. And they're not there today. They're not agreed yet. So SEPA is one aspect of that, but there are other ones as well. So, I mean, we've had kind of an e-invoicing for many years with TAS and Sage. We had something called transaction mail, which meant that if you were a TAS customer and you had two TAS customers, they could send transaction email, which was e-invoicing, to each other, and we've had that, my goodness, for 7 or 8 years. But there's been no take-up on it because it was more an in-house standard than an international standard. So I do think standards are important, and I do think that we do need to harmonise those standards in the coming years if they're to take effect at all.